The words were a quiet defiance, a desperate gambit delivered from the shadows of a rain-slicked alley. "I'm not homeless. I'm hiding." They were spoken by a small boy, no older than 8, huddled beneath the rusted fire escape of a derelict brick building. His face was smudged with city grime. His jacket was 3 sizes too big, but his eyes held a shocking clarity, a strategic fire that belied his age and circumstance. He wasn't just surviving, he was calculating. And his calculation had led him directly to the man who now stood before him. A figure so monolithic, he seemed to block out the weak city light. The man was Julien Croix, and at 40 years old, he was an architect of fear, a retired king. He stood 6'4", a solid 250 pounds of dense muscle sculpted by years of discipline and violence. He was encased in a bespoke, charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the boy's parents made in a year. The fabric clung perfectly to his broad shoulders, a testament to a life far removed from the filth of this alley. Around his neck rested a heavy 24-karat gold Franco chain, its intricate links gleaming even in the dimness. On his massive hands, 2 sovereign rings sat like brass knuckles of pure wealth. But it was the ink that told the real story. Crawling up the right side of his thick neck was a hyper-realistic depiction of the Archangel Michael, his sword raised, casting a screaming Lucifer into the abyss. On the left, in stark Gothic script, were 2 words, Memento Mori, remember death. His hands were a ledger of his life's philosophy. Across the 8 knuckles of his fists, tattooed in bold, prison-style lettering, were 2 more words. The right hand spelled paid, the left cost. Everything had a price. He had paid his, and he had exacted the cost from others. For 15 years, Julien Croix was known on the streets by a different name, Ghost. As the undisputed ruler of the city's narcotics and logistics network, he had earned the moniker for his uncanny ability to make problems and people vanish without a whisper, without a trace. He commanded an army of over 200 soldiers, controlled territory spanning 3 boroughs, and moved with an impunity that made law enforcement look like amateurs. He was a force of nature, a quiet storm that drowned everyone in his path. Then, 5 years ago, the storm had broken. The cost he had so readily exacted from others was finally levied against him. A rival, desperate and foolish, couldn't touch the Ghost himself. So they went after his light. His daughter Lily, 7 years old, was killed in a car bombing meant for him. The explosion didn't just take his child, it vaporized his soul, leaving behind a hollowed-out monument of a man. The day he buried his daughter was the day the Ghost died. He dismantled his entire empire in less than a month. A scorched earth retirement that left a power vacuum still being fought over today. He walked away with 9 figures of clean money, invested it all in legitimate real estate and a high-end private security firm, and vanished from the world that had made him. But the instincts remained, dormant and dangerous. And now, this small boy, this child with the eyes of a strategist, had just woken them up. The boy's words, "I'm hiding," echoed the reason Julien had built his new life, a fortress of wealth and solitude to hide from the man he used to be. Julien took a slow, deliberate step into the alley, his polished Italian leather shoes sinking slightly into the grime. He crouched down, a mountain folding itself to meet a molehill. He moved with a practiced stillness that made no sound. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, devoid of threat, but saturated with an authority that could make seasoned killers tremble. "Hiding from who?" he asked. The boy, whose name was Leo, didn't flinch. This was the moment of his gambit. He had been watching people pass the alley for 2 days. He saw the pity in their eyes, the fear, the indifference. He saw them cross the street to avoid the darkness. Then he saw Julian. He saw the suit, the gold, the sheer, brutal presence of the man. He saw the other pedestrians part like the Red Sea, their eyes downcast, refusing to meet his gaze. And in that, Leo saw not a threat but a different kind of safety. He saw power. The people from the home. Leo whispered, his voice trembling slightly but not breaking. The Bright Future Foundation. It's not a real home. They take kids. They hurt them. He swallowed hard, the devastating simplicity of his next words hanging in the damp air. I saw them put another boy in a van. He was sleeping, but not a real sleep. They said he was going to a new family, but he never came back. Julian's blood ran cold. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, the 5 years of scar tissue he'd built over Lily's memory, began to crack. He saw his daughter's face in this boy's desperate eyes. "Why me?" Julian asked, his voice softer now. "Why did you tell me?" Leo's answer was the key that unlocked the monster. "Because," the boy said, his gaze unwavering, "out of everyone who walked by, you're the only one they would be scared of." That single sentence hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. The boy hadn't run to a police officer, or a kind-looking woman, or a priest. He had run to the predator. He had correctly identified the apex predator and offered himself up, betting that his enemy's enemy was his friend. It was the purest, most terrifying piece of street calculus Julian had ever witnessed. It was something he himself would have done. Subscribe now, because what happens next proves that true strength isn't about the harm you can do, but about the people you choose to protect. Comment where you're watching from. This story will remind you that sometimes the only person who can save you is the one everyone else is afraid of. A profound seismic shift occurred inside Julian. The dormant ghost stirred, not with a cold hunger for power or profit, but with a white-hot, righteous fury he hadn't felt in 5 years. This wasn't business. This was a debt owed to his daughter, a debt he would pay by saving this boy. He extended his massive, tattooed hand. "What's your name?" "Leo." "Leo," Julian said, his voice now a vow. "My name is Julian, and you're not hiding anymore. You're safe now." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the space between them. "When I make a promise, God himself couldn't break it." He gently helped Leo to his feet. The boy was so small, so fragile. Julian wrapped a powerful arm around him and guided him out of the alley, away from the shadows and toward the gleaming, black beast waiting at the curb. An armored Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The chauffeur, a former Special Forces soldier, saw them emerge and immediately opened the rear door without a word. His face an impassive mask. He knew better than to question Julian's actions. Julian placed Leo gently inside on the plush leather seat. The boy sank into it, looking around at the opulent interior with wide, astonished eyes. Julian slid in beside him, the door closing with a heavy, satisfying thud that sealed them off from the world. The city noise vanished, replaced by a tomb-like silence. He pulled out his phone, a customized, encrypted device. He dialed a single number. It was answered on the first ring. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice flat and cold. "Boss," came the reply. Marcus was Julian's former second-in-command, his most loyal lieutenant. He now ran Julian's legitimate security firm, a global operation with over 500 employees. But when Julian called, there was no question of who was in charge. "I have a name," Julian said. "The Bright Future Foundation. I need everything you can find. Financials, personnel, locations, shell corporations, board members. I want to know who owns it, who runs it, and what they had for breakfast this morning. You have 1 hour. Consider it done, Marcus said, and the line went dead. Julian looked at Leo, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and awe. You hungry? Julian asked. Leo nodded silently. Julian leaned forward and spoke to his driver. Take us to the penthouse, and have Esmeralda prepare a meal. For 2. As the Cullinan pulled silently into traffic, Julian watched the city lights blur past. The ghost was back. But this time, he wasn't haunting the city for profit or power. He was hunting monsters. Marcus called back in 47 minutes. The information was as bad as Julian had feared, and worse. It's a ghost ship, Julian, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The Foundation is a shell, registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. The money trail is a labyrinth, washed through a dozen offshore accounts. But I found the property records. They operate out of a decommissioned private hospital on the outskirts of the county. Remote, fortified. It's a fortress. Personnel? Julian asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. Ex-military security, mostly dishonorable discharges. The man in charge is a financier named Alistair Finch. He's got a clean public profile, charity balls, political donations. But dig deeper, and he's connected to some of the ugliest human trafficking networks on the planet. This isn't a crooked adoption agency, Julian. It's a supply depot. A supply depot. The words landed like stones in Julian's gut. These children weren't being sold to desperate couples. They were being sold as commodities, shipped off to the darkest corners of the world for unspeakable purposes. How many kids are registered there? Julian asked. Officially, 0. The place doesn't exist on any state or federal registry. Unofficially, based on surveillance of supply deliveries, food, medical supplies, we're estimating between 15 and 20 children are inside that building right now. 15 to 20 lilies. The thought was a shard of ice in his heart. Marcus, Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Get your best team, full tactical gear. I want them staged 5 miles from the location. No communication, no movement, until I give the word. Is that clear? Crystal, Marcus replied. What's your play? I'm going to knock on the front door, Julian said, and hung up. He went to his master's suite, a cavernous room of glass and steel overlooking the city. He shed the Tom Ford suit, the armor of his new life, and put on the uniform of his old one. Black tactical pants, a tight-fitting black compression shirt that strained against his muscular frame, and combat boots. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't need one. His reputation, his very presence, was a more potent weapon. He slid a single custom-made knife into a sheath on his belt, more a tool than a weapon. Before he left, he checked on Leo. The boy was in the kitchen with Esmeralda, Julian's housekeeper, a warm, elderly woman who had been with him for years, who had helped raise Lily. She had given Leo a sandwich and a glass of milk, and he was eating with a ravenous hunger. He looked up as Julian entered, a smear of mustard on his cheek. For a second, he looked like any other kid. I have to go out for a while, Julian said gently. Esmeralda will take care of you. You are safer here than you would be in Fort Knox. Do you understand? Leo nodded, his eyes serious. Are you going to get the other kids? I keep my promises, Leo, Julian said. If this story is proving that one person's courage can ignite a revolution, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to see it. Now back to the story. The drive to the compound was silent and tense. Julian sat in the back of a blacked-out Escalade, the city's neon glow giving way to the dark, winding roads of the countryside. He wasn't thinking about the violence to come. Violence was easy. It was a simple equation of force and anatomy. He was thinking about the look in Leo's eyes. The terrifying, perfect logic of a child who knew that to fight a monster, you needed a bigger monster. The bright future foundation was a lie in architecture. It was a cold, brutalist concrete structure surrounded by a 10-foot-high fence topped with razor wire. Cameras monitored every angle. 2 guards armed with assault rifles stood at the heavy iron gate. They saw the Escalade approach and tensed, raising their weapons. The vehicle stopped 20 feet from the gate. Julian got out alone. He walked toward them, his steps measured and unhurried. He was a shadow moving against the harsh glare of the security lights. "Private property," the first guard yelled, a young man trying to sound tougher than he was. "Turn around now." Julian didn't stop. He didn't even look at the man. His eyes were fixed on the second guard, an older, harder man with a jagged scar across his cheek. The veteran, the one who would know. He stopped directly in front of the gate, the iron bars separating him from them. "Open it," he said. It wasn't a request. The scar-faced guard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You got a death wish, pal?" Julian's gaze was flat, chilling. "My name is Julian Croix," he said, his voice a low, conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than a shout. 15 years ago, people in this city started calling me the Ghost. I want you to take out your phone, and I want you to ask whoever is on the other end what that name means." He gave a slight, cold smile. "Ask about me. I'll wait." The younger guard looked confused, but the older one froze. The name, the tone, the sheer, unadulterated confidence of the man standing before him. It triggered something. A flicker of recognition of a story heard in a back alley bar, a legend from the old days. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a sudden, prickling fear. He fumbled for his radio, his eyes never leaving Julian. "We got a situation at the front gate," he stammered into the device. "A man. He calls himself Julian Croix. Ghost." The silence on the other end of the radio was answer enough. Then, a frantic, terrified voice crackled back. "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Let him in. Finch wants to see him." The scar-faced guard looked at Julian, his face pale. The legend was real, and it was standing 3 feet in front of him. He fumbled with the controls, and the heavy iron gate began to slide open. Julian walked through without a word, like a king entering his court. He was met on the steps of the main building by Alistair Finch himself. Finch was the opposite of Julian, slight, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, with a practiced, charming smile that didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. He was flanked by 4 more guards, all of them large and armed. "Mr. Croix," Finch said, extending a hand. "An unexpected pleasure. I'm Alistair Finch. I confess I thought you'd retired." Julian ignored the outstretched hand. He looked past Finch, at the cold, sterile building. "You have 17 children in this building, Finch," Julian stated, not asked. "They are not registered with any state agency. They were taken. You are selling them." Finch's smile tightened. "I think you've been misinformed. We are a philanthropic organization helping at-risk youth find—" "Stop talking," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through the man's practiced lies. "You don't know who I am. Let me educate you. For 15 years, I ran every illicit thing that moved in and out of this city. I knew every corrupt cop, every dirty politician, every trafficker who thought they were clever enough to operate on my turf. Your protection, whoever you think you have in your pocket, means nothing to me. Because I promise you, I own bigger monsters than they do. Finch's composure finally cracked. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. What do you want? I want the children, Julian said. All of them. And I want a list. Every name you've worked with. Buyers, suppliers, transporters. Everything. One of Finch's guards, a hulking brute who clearly valued muscle over sense, decided this was his moment to be a hero. He took a step forward, reaching for Julian. You're not in charge here. He never finished the sentence. Julian moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size. It wasn't a brawl. It was a disassembly. A blur of motion, a sharp, precise strike to the man's throat to crush his larynx, followed by an elbow snapping back to shatter the nose of the guard behind him. A leg sweep took a third man down, his knee buckling with an audible pop. The fourth man froze, his hand hovering over his sidearm, as Julian turned his full, undivided attention to him. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. It was controlled, brutally efficient, and utterly silent. Julian never even looked at the men on the ground. His cold eyes were locked on Finch. Choose, Julian said quietly. You open every door, give me every name, and you might live to see a federal prison cell. Or don't. Finch, his face ashen with terror, stared at the silent, professional carnage at his feet. He had built his empire on exploiting the weak. He was now facing someone who was anything but. He had heard the stories of the ghost, of a man who could erase people from existence. He was looking at the living embodiment of those stories. The basement, Finch choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. They're in the basement. Julian nodded once. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Marcus. Execute. 5 miles away, a convoy of blacked-out SUVs carrying a team of highly trained operators roared to life. Simultaneously, he made another call, this one to a detective on the city's major crimes unit, a man named Miller. Miller was one of the few honest cops Julian had known, a man who hated Julian's past, but respected his rigid, if brutal, code. Miller, Julian said, I have a gift for you, an address. You're going to find 17 missing children and the key to dismantling a major international trafficking ring. You'll get an anonymous tip in 5 minutes. Be ready. He hung up and walked past the trembling Finch into the building. The interior was as cold and sterile as a morgue. He followed Finch down a long corridor to a reinforced steel door. Finch unlocked it, and the scene that met Julian's eyes would be burned into his memory forever. 17 small children, aged from 5 to 12, were lying on thin cots in a large windowless room. Some were asleep, a deep, unnatural slumber. Others were awake, their eyes wide with a terror so profound it had gone silent. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair. If this story proves that the most dangerous-looking person can be the only one you can trust, hit subscribe and share it with everyone you know. Because Leo didn't run to a cop or a teacher. He ran to a man with death tattooed on his neck, and that person moved heaven and earth to save him. The rage that surged through Julian was a pure, cold fire. It was the same rage he'd felt standing in the wreckage of the car that had held his daughter. But now, it had a purpose. He walked into the room, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire space. The children flinched, pulling away from him. He was just another monster to them. He stopped in the middle of the room and knelt down, making himself smaller. He looked at a little girl with wide, frightened blue eyes, who reminded him so much of Lily. "My name is Julian," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "You're safe now." He looked at all of them, meeting their terrified gazes one by one. "I promise you, no one is ever going to hurt you again." Just then, the sound of screeching tires and shouting erupted from outside. Marcus and his team, 12 men in full tactical gear, swarmed the compound with ruthless efficiency, neutralizing the remaining guards without firing a single shot. Minutes later, the wail of sirens grew closer as Detective Miller and a fleet of police cars and ambulances arrived. Miller found Julian in the basement, standing guard over the children. The detective, a weary man in a rumpled suit, took in the scene. The terrified kids, the imposing figure of Julian Croix standing over them like a sentinel. "Anonymous tip, huh?" Miller said, his voice dry. "Something like that," Julian replied, his eyes not leaving the children. "Get them out of here, Miller. Get them help." Miller nodded, a look of grudging respect on his face. "We'll take it from here, Croix. Finch and his men are in custody. You were never here." "Good," Julian said, and turned to leave. The reunion between Leo and his mother happened later that night at a secure location. The woman, a single mother who worked 2 jobs, had been living a nightmare for the past week since Leo was snatched from a playground. She thought he was gone forever. When she saw him, she collapsed, a raw, keening sob of relief and disbelief tearing from her. She held him so tightly he could barely breathe, her tears soaking his hair. Julian watched from a distance, an uncomfortable spectator to such raw, pure emotion. The mother finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with a gratitude so intense it was almost painful to witness. "How can I ever—" she started, her voice breaking. "Thank you. God, thank you." Julian shook his head, looking not at her, but at the brave little boy she was holding. "Don't thank me," he said, his voice rough. "Thank your son. He was brave enough to find help. He saved himself. He saved all of them." Leo looked up at him from the safety of his mother's arms. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice clear and certain. "I knew they'd be scared of you." Those words settled deep in Julian's soul, cementing a purpose he hadn't known he was looking for. He wasn't just atoning for his past. He was building a new future. The arrest of Alistair Finch and the rescue of the 17 children was a major news story. But Julian's involvement remained a secret, buried by Detective Miller under a mountain of official paperwork citing a confidential informant. Finch, facing a life sentence, sang like a canary, giving up his entire network. His testimony led to dozens of arrests across 3 continents. But Julian knew it wasn't enough. For every Finch they caught, a dozen more operated in the shadows. So he did what he did best. He built an empire. 2 months later, he liquidated 20% of his real estate portfolio, freeing up over $80 million in capital. He used it to create the Lily Foundation, named for his daughter. It wasn't a charity for galas and fundraisers. It was a weapon. Its mission was simple and brutal: to find and rescue missing and exploited children, operating in the gray spaces where law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't go. He hired Marcus to run it. He recruited former intelligence officers, special forces operators, and forensic accountants, the best in the world. They had a singular mandate: find the children and neutralize the threat, by any means necessary. The Foundation's motto was a reflection of its founder: "We keep our promises." 3 years passed. The Lily Foundation became a legend in the dark corners of the world. It was a ghost organization, its successes never making the papers. but its results were whispered about with fear and awe by those who preyed on the innocent. They had successfully located and facilitated the rescue of 214 children from 13 different countries. They had dismantled 27 trafficking rings and brought financial ruin to countless others. Julian was at a park, sitting on a bench, watching an 11-year-old Leo play soccer with his friends. He was taller now, confident, his laughter ringing out across the field. There was no trace of the terrified boy from the alley. He and his mother met with Julian for lunch on the first Saturday of every month, a ritual that had never been broken. Leo ran over during a break, grabbing a water bottle. "You still wear all those scary tattoos," he said, pointing at Julian's neck. Julian looked down at his hands, at the words paid and cost etched into his skin. "They're a reminder, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "A reminder of the price of things, and a promise of what I'm willing to pay to protect people like you." Leo's mother sat down next to Julian on the bench, a warm smile on her face. "He's at the top of his class," she said softly. "He wants to be a lawyer. He says he wants to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." She looked at Julian, her eyes still full of that same profound gratitude from 3 years ago. "That's because of you. If this story reminded you that there are still good people willing to fight the darkness, subscribe, share, and comment below. Because somewhere right now, a child is looking for someone strong enough to help. And we need more people willing to be that person." Julian deflected, as he always did. That's all him. He was always a fighter. He watched as Leo ran back to the game, a vibrant, joyful flash of life against the green grass. For the first time since Lily's death, a genuine sense of peace settled over him. The hole in his soul was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it was no longer a void. It was filled with purpose. It was filled with 214 names, 214 faces. He was no longer Julian Qua, the legitimate businessman. He was no longer the ghost, the king of the underworld. He had become something else, something forged in tragedy and redeemed through action. He was a promise keeper, a protector. He was the monster that other monsters feared, and his work was just beginning.